Wright was hired as a draftsman. I do that all the time.
Is that in English?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to pronounce it the English word because, I'm an aspiring English woman. So he became a draftsman for Joseph Lyman Silsby.
Think of beer.
Yeah, draftsman. Right. I don't know who Joseph Lyman Silsby is. He must have been a pretty unremarkable architect because,
That was his first
person that
intern? How do you spell it?
Silsby, Silsbee. Now, they actually already had a connection because Silsby had designed...
He was a significant American architect.
Okay, well, according to Wikipedia...
He worked in Syracuse, Buffalo, and Chicago. But in all fairness, I had never heard of him.
Yeah.
So...
But he designed the Unity Chapel in Spring Green, Wisconsin.
He was a mentor of the Prairie School architect, right, including Frank Lloyd Wright. Yeah, sorry.
And Frank Lloyd Wright's family was the one who commissioned Unity Chapel. So Frank had been allowed to collaborate with Silsby back then. So it really is about who you know.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with his
work
designs.
So while working for Silsby, Frank worked on 2 more family projects, including All Souls Church in Chicago, which was the congregation headed by his uncle Jenkins Lloyd Jones, and the Hillside Homeschool 1, because there were many, in Spring Green, which was commissioned by 2 of his aunts. Now, one of Frank Lloyd Wright's defining characteristics was his ego, as Adrienne has mentioned. He had a huge ego. Sorry, I had to. Not unlike a certain president that we have now. No. Though apparently he was not so huge in stature, his passport stated that he was 5'8.5",
which is why the ceilings were so low.
Right. So not terribly short, but not terribly tall.
I think that's short.
5'8.5". Let's be nice.
Yeah.
My husband's barely that.
I feel he seems taller, but maybe it's just his personality.
That's true. He does have a huge personality. So, yeah, I've always heard that Frank Lloyd Wright designed door frames to be shorter because he felt like no one should be taller than him.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So,
or you deserve to hit your head if you are taller.
Yeah, I know. Damn those tall people. So he decided he wasn't being paid enough while he was working for Silsby. So he left to go to work for Beers, Clay, and Dutton.
Is this also in Chicago?
Apparently, yes.
Okay.
I want my last name to be Beers.
Beers.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
I don't know.
It's better than like Dick or something.
That is true. Yeah, I would not like that.
How do you get the nickname Dick from the name Richard?
Richard. I've never understood that.
Yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever. I'd just like to say that. Anyway.
Yeah.
Frank quickly figured out that he was out of his league. He couldn't even handle designing a project from start to finish. So he went back to Silsby, who must have been pretty understanding because he took Frank back and gave him a raise.
Okay.
I was like, could you not just done this from the start? In 1888, he became an apprentice for the famed Chicago firm of Adler and Sullivan. Now, Louis Sullivan popularized the high-rise building, which is the precursor to our modern skyscrapers.
Skyscraper, right.
He also coined the phrase form follows function, which was the basis for modern architecture. Now, Frank did not get along with the other draftsmen in the firm. He later wrote that he had violent altercations between himself and his co-workers. But Louis Sullivan took a liking to him and became his protege. Now, Sullivan was known for having a bit of an ego as well, so I imagine that was a pretty interesting friendship. But Frank did recognize that he could learn a lot from the older man, so he was smart enough to know that. Now, that same year, Frank met a woman named Catherine Tobin. She went by the nickname of Kitty. Now, they met at his uncle's church, and the two would marry in June of 1889. And as a wedding present, Louis Sullivan gave Frank a 5-year employment contract.
That was a wedding present?
Yes.
Interesting.
He also loaned Frank $5,000 so he could build a house in the suburb of Oak Park, which is a pretty she area of Chicago. Now, Frank purchased a large lot of land, gave the pre-existing house to his mother, Anna, and then designed a shingle-style house next door.
Yeah.
For him and Kitty. Now, this house is...
But that's not the... That's not the Frank Lloyd Wright home and studio, right?
It is.
Oh, is it?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Which is, so it's the Frank Lloyd Wright house and studio, or museum and studio.
Wow, okay.
It's a National Historic Landmark.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay.
So, and you can visit it today. It's open. It's a museum. So Frank spent the next few years with Sullivan and eventually became the head draftsman. Now, Adler and Sullivan were more interested in commercial design, but Frank had an interest in residential design. And so he spent many hours at night working on these projects in addition to the large commercial projects that he was assigned as a part of the firm. Of course,
wait, but was he moonlighting? Do they know?
Yes. So he began to moonlight and would design what he would later call bootleg houses.
Oh.
Which were a mashup of Queen Anne style.
Weird.
Which is that kind of, when you think about Victorian
like San
era,
Francisco.
Right. The wildly colored houses with all the different things going on. He married that style with the plainer colonial revival style.
Colonial revival?
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of would like to see, I should have looked up.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, look it up.
I will. Oh, okay. So it's really just a Queen Anne, but without the fluff.
Okay. I see tower.
Yeah. So kind of tower but sort of pared down, like clearly modern, like not, doesn't have the gingerbread. So it has the form, right? It has the porch and the turret and the steep roof and dormers, but it doesn't have like frilly, lacy millwork on it.
That works.
Yeah. And I think the colors are a little bit more muted.
Okay. So he was doing this.
Interesting.
As we said, moonlighting, which basically means that nobody knew that he was doing it. So in 1893, Louis Sullivan found out that he was designing on the side. So you want to know how he figured that out?
No. I mean, yes, I want to know, but I don't know.
Frank designed a house for a woman living in Sullivan's neighborhood.
Did he not realize?
No, he knew where he lived.
Okay.
So Sullivan was walking by one day and thought the house looked kind of familiar. Needless to say, he was pretty pissed off when he discovered this. When I say he was pissed off, he basically told Frank, "You're in breach of your contract, and so I'm not giving you the deed to your house."
Oh, man.
So Frank's response was, "To hell with you, I'm going to quit."
Yeah.
Dankmar Adler, who was the Adler and Sullivan, felt bad for Frank and actually managed to get a deed and send it to him. But the falling out between Sullivan and Wright would last for over a decade before they started talking to each other again. So
That's a long time.
That is a long time. So Frank strikes out on his own. By this time, he'd been married for 4 years and had 2 kids with another one on the way.
Okay. And this is with Kitty.
Right.
Okay.
And so he set up shop in the Schiller building, which ironically was designed by Louis Sullivan. And he continued to design residential homes in the Oak Park area, which was where he built his own home. And so consequently, this neighborhood of Oak Park is on the National Register of Historic Places because so many of these houses were designed by him. He also expanded his house quite substantially, which you can see the plans on, I think it's the University of Chicago, has got them online, and you can kind of see the progression of what he did. By 1898, they had 5 children. So basically, they were having one every 2 to 3 years.
Oh my gosh.
And so he built...
How does he have time for that? I mean,
right?
He working, moonlighting? Okay.
There's always time for that. No. He designed and built a new playroom and also a separate studio for himself. Now, Frank does not have the best reputation.
As an architect or as a human?
As a human.
Okay.
But according to his son, or one of his sons, he was a decent father. He apparently had an epic wit and was just kind of fun a fun guy at home. They said that he would usually give the feeling of a jolly carnival. I imagine that probably pissed his wife off. And she's at home all day with the kids and having to discipline them, and he comes home and it's a party. Mm-hmm. So Frank's sixth and last child with Kitty was born in 1902. So this is then. Just previous to that, in 1896, Frank moved into the newly completed Steinway Hall building and joined forces with 3 other architects to form...
his office moved into that.
Right, his office.
So he's still living in their original
Yeah, he's still
studio.
in Oak Park, but his office is in the Steinway Hall building. Mm-hmm. And with these 3 other architects, they kind of created this idea of architecture called the Prairie School.
So, first of all, this is from the Chicago Architecture Foundation, which is a really good resource. And for those of you that have been to Chicago, you know what an awesome city it is. And for those of you that haven't, please go.
We're going in September.
Oh, really?
Well, our flight from Paris is landing in Chicago, and then we have like a 9-hour layover. So,
oh, no way.
So we're going to like go in and check the city out because I've never seen it.
Oh, it's fantastic. That's not a whole lot of time. Are you okay?
It's going to be a whirlwind too.
Yeah. Well, if you just go to the center where like the Art Institute is.
Yeah. And
the Bean and Millennial Park. I mean, I don't know what you'll see. The river, the Marina Tower. Oh,
what about
so good?
The Magnificent Mile. What is that?
I don't know.
Isn't it like where a lot of the museums are?
I think so.
Okay.
And they do really great tours. I don't know if you'll have time for that, but anyway, great city. The Prairie style. So according to the Chicago Architecture Foundation, the Prairie style emerged in Chicago around 1900. So this is post World's Fair. 1893 World's Fair, White City. I don't know how many of those buildings are still standing. I know there's some still standing today. So maybe in 1900 there was, there were more.
But they were all like, most of them were just like,
they were meant to be torn down.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it was like
buildings.
Wood and, whitewash or wood paint. Anyway.
I think like one of the pavilions is still there.
I think so too. I don't remember which one. Prairie style emerged in 1900 from the work of a group of young architects, including Wright. These architects melded the ideals of the arts and crafts movement with its emphasis on nature, craftsmanship, and simplicity, and the work and writings of Lou Sullivan. They embraced Sullivan's architectural theories, which called for non-derivative, distinctly American architecture rooted in nature, with a sense of place, but also incorporated modern elements like flat planes and stylized ornamentation. So for the layman, what they mean by non-derivative is that in the Victorian period of architecture, you had all these revival styles, Gothic revival, Moorish revival, colonial revival was 1920s. But the point is, like, there's revivals, from the 1850s, maybe even earlier.
Yeah.
1830s was Greek revival.
Right.
Up until the 1920s, colonial revival was even later than that. So what they did, Prairie style was original architecture.
So that would have been completely unique.
It was unique to the U.S. because you don't really find Prairie style anywhere else. Yeah. Although, of course,
it's kind of like arts and crafts.
Right, designed in, Japan and other places in the world. But, so they used the ideas of arts and crafts, but it was very simplified. The aesthetic was simplified, and it was original.
And I think, there are some differentiations, but when people say that's a craftsman bungalow,
sure,
they're thinking Prairie School. That's
they
the
are
precursor.
Yeah, I think so too. And then the Roby house that Wright designed in Chicago, or I think that's the one on the campus of University of Chicago that we went through when I was an undergrad. It wasn't only residences that were built in the Prairie style, but there were schools, apparently warehouses, which I've never seen, and park buildings. So small little, pavilion type structures. And apparently Oak Park is, I guess, not surprising. Oak Park has the highest concentration of Prairie style buildings in the country. Wright said that Prairie style buildings are married to the ground, which I like that. a lot because they were long and low.
Yeah.
Not like they didn't have like these giant, tall picture windows. They had sort of ribbons of